They rode the current for maybe half an hour, letting it lead them away from the castle and getting their breath back. Then, slowly, limbs not wanting to work, they dragged themselves from the water. The sun shone bright as they lay on the bank, warm on their wet skin. Guy lay back with his bare feet stretched out in front of him. He might even have fallen asleep. "We need to get moving," said Robin. "Find something to eat, find you some shoes." "What's the rush?" said Guy, though he was ravenously hungry. "We need to get back to Nottingham," said Robin sternly. "Warn them about the army Isabella's bought herself." Guy sat up. "All right," he said, "but food and shoes first." "Yeah," said Robin, getting to his feet. "But it might take a while. I've no idea where we are." They walked for a long time through the forest, going carefully because of Guy's bare feet. The sunlight dappled through the canopy of leaves above them, but they were cold and tired, their clothes still wet from the river. Guy felt himself shaking with fatigue. They just had to keep on going. Eventually they found a clearing, the trees cut back from the carriageway so there was no cover for highwaymen. Robin didn't know which way to take, so they continued to head away from the river. Deep lines had been cut in the road by years of heavy carriages and carts. They walked side by side, each in one of the cut furrows. Guy's feet were sore and blistered, but he had too much pride to complain. "Someone's come this way in the last hour," said Robin, pointing at the tracks in the mud ahead of him. There were marks of horseshoes, a single horse. "Going at speed," said Guy. "The marks are so spaced apart." "We might be on the mail route," said Robin. "So there'll be a post house up ahead." The thought put a spur in their step. They continued on, following the road through the forest. The sun sat high in the air, warming them, burning their cheeks. It could only have been midday or early afternoon, but Guy felt the full body exhaustion of a full day's toil. At last, they emerged from the forest and looked out over the gentle slopes and farmland. A large 2-story building guarded the road where it entered the forest. Delicious smells curled from the windows as Guy and Robin hobbled towards it. Robin fished in his pockets. "Have you got any money?" he asked Guy. Guy searched in his own pockets. "Nothing for a meal," he said. Robin nodded. "All right," he said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "We pop round the back, see what we can take." "I thought you gave," said Guy disapprovingly. "Isn't that your thing?" "Needs must," said Robin, "and we'll be back to pay our debt." Guy followed Robin as they snuck around the side of the house. He glanced through a window into a long room, tables jostling in the space in front of a bar. It was an alehouse. He could almost taste the beer in his parched, exhausted mouth. They made their way to the back door. Robin paused, just out of sight of the doorway, listening. Guy could hear nothing from inside. He glanced round. In the open space, washing hung from the line. There were at least 2 women and a man in residence, judging by the washing. An axe sat beside a large stack of freshly chopped logs. An active, capable man, Guy supposed. They ventured into the building. The carpet felt odd under Guy's blistered, bare feet. He could smell something tantalizing up ahead, meat cooking over a fire. He yearned for something, anything to eat. But this smelled like a feast. "Okay," whispered Robin, turning back to Guy. "We don't let them know that we're here, so..." The words died in his throat. He'd lived for years on his wits in the forest, honing his instincts in his ears, and he heard, before Guy did, the person coming towards them down the passageway. Guy was ready to run, but Robin stood his ground. He raised himself up to his full height, arms out, showing he had no weapons. And a woman stepped into the room. Her thick, dark hair was tied up behind her head, exposing a round face like a barn owl with high and rounded cheekbones. There was flour and stains down her simple dress where she'd been working. She gave a start when she saw the 2 ragged men in her house. And then her eyes twinkled in recognition. Said Robin. Good afternoon, ma'am. The woman smiled a crooked smile. Robin of Locksley, she said. You have always had the nicest manners. They sat by the fire, enjoying a tankard of beer each. Guy almost choked on the first sip of dark ale, as if his body had given up all hope of ever eating again. They sat in silence, exhausted and sore, until the woman returned with 2 bowls of steaming stew. Deborah, you're an angel, said Robin, tucking into the meal. I'm a lot of things, she told them, grinning. Guy ate, forcing himself to take each spoonful slowly, not to just gobble it down. However hungry he might have been, he still knew how to comport himself in front of the fairer sex. Robin ate greedily, finishing the food before Guy had managed more than a couple of mouthfuls. Deborah went back to the kitchen and returned with a whole cauldron of food. I like boys with a healthy appetite, she told them. Once they'd eaten, they were better able to explain themselves. But Deborah knew Robin of old. It turned out she'd worked in Lord Brackenbury's castle when Robin had been an apprentice. She'd heard all about the things he'd been up to since, living in trees, causing all sorts of mischief. Most people didn't believe half the things attributed to him, but Deborah remembered how he'd been in his teens, the trouble he'd got into, and it all sounded just his thing. So what you doing down this way? She asked them. Paying your respects? Robin gazed up at her. We heard a rumour, he said, of an army of mercenaries, soldiers from the continent, so we came to have a look. Oh yes, said Deborah. We had some of them in here, Germans I think. Really like the beer. The bad news, said Guy. We need to get back to Nottingham and warn people. Deborah shrugged. Oh, worry about it, love, she said. I hear they've all gone home. Robin and Guy exchanged glances. What makes you say that? Asked Robin. Deborah smiled. We had some lady stop here just an hour ago. Very grand she was. Wanted to swap horses and be on her way. Had to get back to Nottingham, she said. Isabella, said Robin and Guy at the same time. Well, she didn't give her name, said Deborah. But she did have a fancy bit of parchment that she said were from Prince John. I took her money and let her have the horse. But she mentioned the mercenaries before she left, said Robin. Well, she mentioned something, said Deborah. I asked if everything were all right. You should have seen her, all a fluster. Man trouble, is it, I asked. And she said it were more about people not being professional, not honouring a contract. Bunch of people had let her down and all run off home. What? Laughed Guy. They've gone. Why? Deborah's eyes twinkled. Well, you're the one without the shoes, she said. You tell me. I don't know what you mean, said Guy. Deborah turned to Robin, but he only smiled at her. I said they'd been drinking in here, said Deborah. The Germans. We told them a bit about the area, the history, what happened to poor Lord Brackenbury and his son. You told them that some people think the castle's haunted, said Robin. We might have, said Deborah innocently. The lady, she said they were superstitious idiots, she told Guy, that they thought they'd been fighting a dead man. They saw the body in the bed, said Guy. Deborah nodded sadly. We didn't know he were there, she said in a quiet voice. I'll get my husband to see to that, don't worry. But why did they think they'd been fighting him, said Guy. They'd been following one man, said Deborah. They'd been following the tracks he left. And even as her ladyship had to admit there was nobody else in the castle, no way anyone could have escaped. All they find is the dead man. And beside his bed... My riding boots, said Guy in amazement. Your riding boots, said Robin. Guy took another swig of his ale. They think the ghost was defending the castle, he said. Looks that way, said Robin, grinning. I didn't know what to think, said Deborah. I thought maybe they were right until you both showed up and you not wearing your shoes. That was your plan all along? Asked Guy, incredulous. Nah, said Robin. I only thought of it at the end. Bit of misdirection, just to leave them scratching their heads. Worked, didn't it? Guy sat back in his chair, shaking his head in bewilderment. He found himself grinning as he took another swig of his drink. They'd not just found the cohort of mercenaries, they had sent them packing. He wished he could have seen Isabella's face when she tried to explain it all to Deborah. The thought of it was worth all the hardship he and Robin had been through. Robin turned to Deborah. "We'll go back ourselves," he told her. "We'll bury Lord Brackenbury. Do it right. Fetch Gisborne's shoes while we're there." Deborah nodded. "Good boy," she said. "I'm sorry, but no one could bear to go back to that place who had seen it as it was. If we'd even thought he was still up there." "He wouldn't have let you help him," said Robin. "He was too proud. He chose to stay." A single tear cut a line down Deborah's cheek. "But it's so unfair," she said. "All that happened to him and he could never do anything about it. He couldn't fight back." Robin took her hand. "Deborah," he said, gazing into her eyes, "I don't know what Isabella wanted with those mercenaries. It wasn't anything good. And whatever it was, Lord Brackenbury stopped it, as if he really had fought them himself. He lived to do his duty, and today he did. He'd have loved that." Guy shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He always found Robin's earnestness a bit hard to take, but he could see that it offered some solace to the woman who had taken them in. He could see that Robin appealed to people's better instincts. Deborah smiled through the tears in her eyes. "Ah," she said, wiping her nose on the back of her sleeve. "Oh, he'd have loved it all right. The old git would have found it hilarious.